Yeah, I mean, I think that as you look and you want to be...
I'm not trying to be flip about this.
No,
I understand what I'm saying.
I understand.
Yeah.
And I think that, you know, if you're thinking in terms of the future of California, I mean, the future is now. You can look around and you can see that you need to speak different languages to be able to have access to even just basic needs here in our cities. But I think it's pretty ethnocentric to sit there and say that English is the most important language. You know, I think you ought to look at what's happening in our communities. And I understand there's a concern globally, but I'm concerned about what's happening right now here in my community and what's happening in California. And right now, with this 227, what has happened, it has given people an anti-immigrant sentiment. I mean, even again, going back to Pittsburgh, students have been put in, you know, in timeout and put in trouble for using Spanish, not in the classroom, but in the playground, but in the cafeteria. And all that is because they're trying to interpret the law. They're trying to interpret 227. And so there's this anti-immigrant sentiment.
Sure doesn't say anything in 227 about putting people in timeout for using Spanish. No,
well,
that's the way I read the bill.
Well, and that's my whole point, is that the essence of this law has been created, and the way it's being interpreted, I would argue that I think more schools are trying to interpret the law by the letter of the law and finding that they're making mistakes and violating the kids' civil rights.
And you think that's because it's a poorly written law, don't you?
I think so. I think it's poorly written. Yeah. I think that, you know, if you think about it...
You're getting this 227 fight all over again here.
If you can ask any district to try to interpret that and try to implement it, the ones that have been successful, under Ron's definition of successful, are ones that had a strong bilingual program, and they knew what services needed, and basic services need to be there. If you look at school districts throughout that are in disarray, they're still trying to interpret what parental waivers. I'm in a district right now where parental waivers have not been given for 3 years.
Well, Ron, are you trying to replicate the same law are you guys the standard bearers here for Arizona and Colorado and these other states who are moving in the same direction?
Well, I wasn't really involved in the Colorado effort, and to be honest, they really didn't do a very good job, so there's not going to be any initiative on the ballot in Colorado.
It went down. I thought there was going to be another one coming up, though.
No, in 2 years' time, maybe, or something like that. And, you know, I'm actually working with people to help that.
But there's even talk in New York and Massachusetts.
Right. Oh, exactly. And in Arizona, actually, in about a month and a half, the people of Arizona will be voting on a clone of 227, which seems to have a lot of popular support there. I really think the initiative is fairly solidly written. In other words, it simply requires that when children enter public school in California, if they don't already know English under normal circumstances, they should be placed in intensive sheltered English immersion programs to teach them English and other subjects as quickly as possible. And once they know enough English to do regular work, they should be put in regular classes.
All right, we want to hear from someone from your side of the street. Ruben, we've got Liz from Pittsburgh joining us. Hi, Liz.
Hi.
You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
My question is to Mr. Unz, if he's only talking about one school district in the whole state of California, and I'd like to know how many school districts are successful in California. And obviously, it's only one school district that he's talking about. Can he answer that question for me?
Well, no, test scores are generally up.
Well, they're not only a little bit. If we look at over 1 million immigrant students in the state of California, it's about 1.2, 1.3 million in elementary school. Of all those students, the average increase in test scores in 2 years is 40%. In other words, the average mean percentile test score of over 1 million immigrant students went up 40%. In Oceanside, they went up 100%. And there are a lot of school districts, for example, that kept their bilingual programs where the increases were 0 or 5% or 10%, but the statewide average is 40%. And anybody who deals with educational reform knows that a 40% increase in test scores in 2 years is nothing short of remarkable.
Unless people are teaching to the test, and unless, well, Liz, you have a response to that?
Well, obviously it's not happening in Pittsburgh. I'd like to know how many school districts that are having the same problem as we are. And obviously,
I have to admit, I don't know too much about the Pittsburgh School District in particular, and I can check. If I'd known ahead of time, I could check.
Well, Ruben, do you know? Are there
actually? I happen to have the federal investigation.
Just happens to have some data with them there. No, I mean
test scores are really the interesting thing.
Yeah.
Well, the test scores haven't gone up in our.
Well, what about other districts? Are other districts suffering like Pittsburgh?
I think so. I
think so or know so?
I know so. I mean, I'm in touch with parents throughout the community, and that's what's happening. Is you're having a lot of schools that are basically trying to gear up for this test. Everything is for the test. So I would think if test scores went up, there's several variables that you have to look at, not just was it bilingual ed or no bilingual ed. I would say there's a lot of variables. What's happening with the instruction?
Well, they're teaching phonics and, you know, all kinds of stuff, like we said earlier. Evie from Fremont is our next caller. Hi, you're on the air. Evie.
Yes.
Join us. You're on the air.
Yes.
Hi.
Yes. Good evening.
Hi.
I'm speaking from the perspective of an elementary school teacher. I've taught in California for 20 years, and I'm very familiar with the bilingual program, having been in bilingual schools. The children that I've had in my class from other countries, including Mexico, that have come in knowing no English, have spoken perfect English and are writing and reading very well at the end of my year. The ones that were in the bilingual program, all their test scores are lower. It also segregates the kids in school. The bilingual children hang out in a corner of the playground by themselves for 6, 7 years. They do not speak to any of the other children in school, and I do not see where it is a good program in any sense of the word.
Well, there's some observations from the trenches, the teaching trenches. Ruben Rosalez?
Well, again, from the trenches of the parents and the students, you'll see that there's segregation going on now with 227. And that was one of the findings in our report, that the kids were being pulled up, trying to interpret, again, 227. The kids were pulled out of the classroom for a half hour a day and put in a special classroom. So there's segregation going on now. It hasn't changed with 227, if that's the case.
Ron Unz, want to weigh in here?
Well, I think what that particular teacher said is exactly what I've heard from so many different teachers and parents. And that's why there were protests many times against bilingual education. The whole effort we were involved in with 227 began when I read a series of articles in the LA Times about a group of immigrant Latino parents in downtown Los Angeles who started a public boycott of their local elementary school because it refused to teach the children English. Now, sometimes bilingual activists have encouraged parents to protest 227. In fact, in Oceanside, the district we're talking about, there were a lot of protests against Ken Noonan for being so strict his interpretation of 227, eliminating all the bilingual classes. And he got a lot of flack. But once his test scores started going up so rapidly, suddenly all the parents became very happy. And I would think in most of the districts around California that are strictly interpreting 227, the increase in test scores will make the parents very happy.
Would that make you very happy? Let's just be hypothetical for a minute, Ruben Rosalez. If the test scores went up in Pittsburgh, would that make you concede to Mr. Unz that maybe dropping bilingual education is part of the reason, and you'd be ready to whoop it up with him and the rest of these people?
Well, I think Pittsburgh is probably the worst example you could cite because they did not implement the program at all. And so if you're looking at, comparing it, that's probably the worst case scenario. So if you think in terms, and you got to keep in mind, proponents of bilingual ed are not saying teach my kids only in Spanish. They're not saying, I only want my kid to learn that language and I don't want them to learn English. They're saying very much, I want my kid to learn English. I want them to be effective.
Another teacher on here. Let's try to get her in. Teresa from Antioch, join us on Take Issue. You're on the air. Welcome.
Hi. I'm sitting here listening, and I am just furious listening to the comments made by Ron Unz, made by other teachers. As a former teacher of Pittsburgh and a bilingual educator, I just cannot imagine someone thinking that bilingual ed is not good for those newcomers, those kids who speak no English, those kids who really struggle in an English-only classroom. It's amazing how you might have someone, Ron Unz. I can't even imagine having someone, a child. I'm just so angry. I can't even speak. But
well, I'll tell you what. Let's take your comments. Ron Unz, one of your children, or you yourself as a child, imagine suddenly you go to Lower Slobovia and you have to learn Slobovian. Or would you want help? Wouldn't you want whatever help would be available to you?
But that's the whole thing. In other words, I've known a lot of people who moved to other countries when they were young children, or people have come to America as immigrants, and all of them agree the only way you can learn a language is to be immersed in that language. And that way you learn it quickly. And once you've learned it, you can do well in school.
Now, let me hear from Teresa quickly to that point. Teresa?
Well, I can understand how people would see that. But, you also have to take into account that you do have, Pittsburgh, we did have and still have very qualified teachers who know what they're doing, BCLAD or not BCLAD certified. And we do a very good job. And the minute something goes wrong, who's blamed? It's the teachers. When in reality, the person that should be trained, or the people that should be blamed, are the administrators who are not providing the needed support that the kids and the teachers need.
All right, with that brickbat at administrators, we're going to have to close out this segment, but it's certainly been an enlightening one. I want to thank Ruben Rosalez, thank Ron Unz, thank you, Teresa, thank the others who called in.